The air in Memphis, Tennessee, always felt a little heavier, a little warmer, as if the very atmosphere hummed with the ghost of cotton fields and the vibrant spirit of rock and roll. But for Elvis Presley, in the late autumn of 1970, the hum wasn't just music. It was a restless disquiet. He sat in his study at Graceland, surrounded by awards, gold records, and the silent tributes to a fame almost unimaginable. Yet his gaze wasn't on the glittering trophies. It was fixed on the television screen, where news anchors spoke, in grave tones about unrest, division, and a generation feeling lost. Elvis was the king? Yes, but he was also just a man born of humble roots, a man who loved his country deeply. And right now his country felt like it was tearing itself apart. The Vietnam War raged, young people protested in the streets, and a deep chasm seemed to be forming between the establishment and the counterculture. Elvis, with his glittering jumpsuits and hip-shaking moves, might have seemed like the epitome of that counterculture to some, but in his heart when he believed in unity. He tried to do his part, of course. His music, he hoped, brought joy and an escape. He'd served in the army just like any other young man, even when he could have easily avoided it. But now it felt like more was needed. A deep conviction began to settle in his soul, a belief that he had to do something beyond records and concerts. He had to reach out to the very top. "Vernon," Elvis said, his voice softer than the growl he used on stage, but with an underlying steel. His father looked up from the newspaper, a perpetual worried frown etched on his face. "Get me my secretary. I need to send a telegram." Vernon raised an eyebrow. "A telegram, son? Who to?" Elvis turned from the TV, his famous blue eyes suddenly intense. "To the president, Richard Nixon." Vernon nearly dropped his paper. "The president, Elvis? What in the world?" "I need to meet him," Elvis stated, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I need to tell him what I see, what I feel, what I hear from the people out there. I believe I can help. I can connect with those kids, those lost souls. I understand them, Vernon, and I believe he needs to understand them too." The idea, even to Elvis's closest circle, seemed utterly outlandish. A rock and roll sensation, known for his flashy lifestyle and rebellious image, wanting to meet the stern, traditional President of the United States. It was like two different planets, colliding. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, usually a master of publicity stunts, was initially resistant. "Elvis, darling boy, what good would this do? The president is a busy man, and you're an artist. Stay out of politics." But Elvis was uncharacteristically firm. "This isn't politics, Colonel. This is about America. And I have a message, something I need to show him, something important." He didn't elaborate, not even to the Colonel, which only fueled Parker's skepticism. Despite the doubts, when Elvis Presley set his mind to something, it usually happened. A telegram handwritten by Elvis himself was sent to the White House. It was polite, respectful, yet firm in its request for a meeting, stating Elvis's deep concern for the nation and his desire to assist in any way possible. It was signed simply, Elvis Presley. The telegram landed on the desk of a junior aide in the West Wing, who initially thought it was a prank. "Elvis Presley. The singer wants to meet the president," he scoffed, showing it to a colleague. "What? Is he going to serenade him?" But the sheer audacity of their request, coupled with Elvis's undeniable fame, made it impossible to ignore entirely. It bounced up the chain of command, from aide to assistant, from assistant to chief of staff, until it finally landed, somewhat incredulously, before President Nixon himself. Nixon, a man of rigid routine and deep suspicion of the counterculture, was, to say the least, perplexed. "Elvis Presley?" he repeated, his brow furrowed. What in heaven's name would he want? His first thought was a publicity stunt, or perhaps some outlandish request for a pardon for a friend, or even a demand for more creative freedom. He envisioned a long-haired, loud-mouthed musician, disrespecting the Oval Office. Yet there was something about the simple sincerity of the telegram, its plea for help for the nation, that piqued Nixon's curiosity. He was a president grappling with immense challenges, and perhaps, just perhaps, this cultural icon, this king who commanded the loyalty of millions of young people, might offer a unique perspective. Or at the very least, it would be a bizarre anecdote for his memoirs. "Schedule him," Nixon finally decreed, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "A short meeting. I want to see what this is all about." And so on a chilly December morning, a flight was chartered, a security detail arranged, an Elvis Presley worn briefcase clutched in his hand, prepared to leave his Graceland kingdom and step into the hallowed, formidable halls of the White House. He knew this wasn't about singing or shaking his hips. This was about something far more profound, something he truly believed could make a difference, even if he wasn't entirely sure how President Nixon would react to it. He carried not a guitar, but a burden of hope and a secret. Washington, D.C. on December 21st, 1970, was a city of gray suits and even grayer skies. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of impending winter, and the usual hustle of government business filled the streets. But that morning, an unusual ripple of excitement, mixed with outright bewilderment, spread through the various offices and corridors of power. The whisper was everywhere. Elvis Presley is coming to the White House. Elvis's plane, a sleek jet provided by a generous friend, landed quietly at National Airport. Stepping off, he cut a striking figure even by his own standards. He wasn't in a jumpsuit yet, but his clothes were still a testament to his unique style. A purple velvet suit, a high-collared shirt, open just enough to reveal a flash of gold chain, and those signature tinted sunglasses. His hair, dark and perfectly coiffed, seemed to absorb the muted winter light. He was accompanied by his bodyguard, Sonny West, a hulking figure who looked like he could stop a charging bull. As they were ushered into a waiting limousine, the curious stares followed them like a physical force. Secret Service agents, known for their poker faces, couldn't help but exchange wide-eyed glances. It was one thing to guard a politician, another, entirely, to escort the king of rock and roll. The drive to the White House was a blur of D.C. landmarks, but Elvis hardly noticed. His mind was elsewhere, rehearsing what he would say, how he would present his case. He knew the world saw him as a performer, a larger-than-life entertainer. He needed Nixon to see him as something more, a concerned citizen, a fellow American who genuinely wanted to contribute. As the limousine pulled up to the West Wing entrance, the sight of the iconic building filled Elvis with a mixture of awe and apprehension. This was the heart of American power, a place where history was made, where decisions that affected millions were finalized. And he, Elvis Aaron Presley, was about to walk inside. Inside the White House was a whirlwind of hushed efficiency. Staff members, from seasoned advisors to young interns, found excuses to walk past the waiting area, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary performer. The buzz was palpable. Some were thrilled, some openly dismissive, but no one was indifferent. Nixon's chief of staff, H.R. Haldeman, a man known for his stern demeanor and military-like precision, met Elvis in the reception area. Haldeman looked Elvis up and down, his expression unreadable. He'd seen a lot of interesting characters pass through the White House, but Elvis Presley was in a league of his own. "Mr. Presley," Haldeman said, his voice flat, "the president will see you shortly. Please, make yourself comfortable." Elvis nodded politely, his rock and roll swagger surprisingly muted in the presence of such formality. "Thank you, sir," he replied, his southern drawl soft. He clutched his worn leather briefcase a little tighter. Didn't look expensive, certainly not befitting a man of his immense wealth. It looked like something someone would carry important papers in, something used and well-loved. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. Elvis sat seemingly calm, but his mind raced. He thought of his mother Gladys, and how proud she would be, a simple boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, now sitting in the White House. He thought of the young people he met on tour, the letters he received from fans all over the country, letters that painted a picture of a nation yearning for connection, for understanding. Finally, a door opened, and a secretary announced, "Mr. Presley, the president is ready to see you." Elvis stood, smoothed his velvet suit, and took a deep breath. He followed the secretary down a corridor, the carpet thick under his feet, absorbing all sound. Then he was ushered into the Oval Office. President Richard Nixon stood behind his desk, a man of imposing presence, even from a distance. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his expression serious, almost grim. He wore a dark suit impeccably tailored, and his eyes, though sharp, held a weariness that spoke of the heavy burdens he carried. The two men, so utterly different in every conceivable way, stood for a moment simply observing each other. King of rock and roll, symbol of youthful rebellion and flamboyant showmanship, facing the President of the United States, embodiment of conservative authority, and the establishment. "Mr. Presley," Nixon said, his voice surprisingly deep but lacking any warmth. He extended a hand across the desk, a gesture of formal politeness rather than genuine welcome. Elvis stepped forward, his own hand firm as he shook the president's. "Mr. President," he replied, his voice respectful. He felt the weight of the moment, the surreal nature of it all. He knew he was supposed to be asking for a badge, a symbol of authority to help with his fight against drugs. That was merely the outward reason, a convenient excuse. What he had in his briefcase was far more personal, far more profound, and he hoped, truly hoped, it would bridge the immense chasm between them. The stage was set, the world-famous entertainer and the embattled leader. What would happen when their worlds truly collided? Elvis knew he had to tread carefully, but he also knew he couldn't back down from what he felt was his duty. He just had to find the right moment to open that briefcase. The air in the Oval Office crackled with an almost tangible tension. Two titans, each in their own domain, stood across from each other, separated by a vast chasm of background and public persona. President Nixon motioned towards a chair. "Please, Mr. Presley, have a seat." Elvis sat, placing his worn briefcase carefully on the floor beside him. He noticed the formal arrangement of the room. The American flag, the presidential seal, the meticulous order that spoke of power and tradition. It was a stark contrast to the flamboyant chaos that often surrounded him. Nixon settled back into his large leather chair, his gaze fixed on Elvis. There was an unspoken challenge in his eyes. Let's see what you're really about." Kind of look. "So, Mr. Presley," Nixon began, his voice dry, "I understand you've come a long way. What can I do for you?" Elvis cleared his throat. He knew the common perception of why he was there. He had indeed requested a federal agent badge, an official recognition of his desire to help in the fight against drug abuse, which he genuinely believed in. But that was just the surface. He needed to find a way to express the deeper reason. Maybe not the same people who listen to you, but they listen. Nixon's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. Probably thought Elvis was about to launch into a speech about rock and roll saving the world. "I appreciate your patriotism, Mr. Presley," he said, his tone still guarded. "But I assure you, my administration is working tirelessly to address these issues." Elvis nodded. "To help show those kids that even someone like me believes in law and order, in doing what's right." Nixon leaned forward slightly. The badge, that was a specific, tangible request. It was unusual, certainly, but not entirely out of the realm of presidential perks for influential figures. It was the kind of thing he might humor a celebrity with to gain some good press or a favorable public perception. "A badge," Nixon mused, his eyes narrowing. "Yes, sir," Elvis affirmed, his gaze steady. "It's destroying lives, ruining families. I've seen it firsthand, and I believe I can make a difference. Reach some of those kids who might not listen to anyone else." Nixon considered this, tapping his fingers lightly on the desk. He was a pragmatist. If giving Elvis Presley an honorary badge could somehow encourage young people to stay away from drugs, it might be worth the minor oddity. But he also wondered if there was an ulterior motive, a hidden agenda. Was this just a celebrity seeking more power, more notoriety? "We can certainly look into that, Mr. Presley," Nixon said, a hint of dismissal in his voice. as if the official business was nearly concluded. Probably expected Elvis to thank him profusely and then make his exit. But Elvis didn't move. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes losing their deference and gaining in newfound intensity. "Mr. President, that badge, it's important to me. A symbol, but it's not the main reason. I came all this way." Nixon raised an eyebrow. This was unexpected. He had assumed the badge was the entire point. He reached for it, his hand lingering on the leather, as if gathering his courage. "Mr. President," he began, his voice dropping to a softer, more intimate tone, one he often used when speaking directly to his fans, not performing, but truly connecting. "You lead this country. You make the big decisions, but sometimes when you're up here at the top, it's hard to know what's really happening on the ground, what the ordinary folks are going through, what their fears are, what their hopes are." Nixon's expression remained unreadable, but a flicker of something, perhaps mild irritation, perhaps genuine interest, passed through his eyes. He was not accustomed to being lectured, especially not by a rock and roll star. "I believe," Sir Elvis continued, ignoring the president's stoic face, "that the strength of this nation isn't just in its policies or its military. It's in its people. And I've had the privilege, unlike most, to hear from a lot of those people, to truly connect with them." Took a deep breath and then slowly, deliberately, he unlatched the briefcase. The clicks echoed softly in the quiet room. Nixon watched, intrigued despite himself. What would the king pull out? A guitar? A gold record? A list of demands? He braced himself for something extravagant, something attention-grabbing. Elvis lifted the lid inside. It wasn't what Nixon expected. There were no stacks of money, no glittering jewels, no flamboyant memorabilia. Instead, neatly organized into various folders, were stacks and stacks of paper. All of them looked like letters, ordinary letters. Nixon leaned forward, his curiosity now fully piqued. What was this? This was not the rock and roll spectacle he had anticipated. This was something else, entirely something quieter, and potentially far more intriguing. Elvis looked up, his blue eyes earnest. "Mr. President," he said, his voice soft but firm, "this is what I really came to show you." The sound of the briefcase latches clicking open seemed to echo in the Oval Office, amplifying the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. Nixon, expecting some flashy prop, some symbol of Elvis's celebrity, found himself staring at stacks of plain paper, not contracts, not photos, but what appeared to be letters. Elvis carefully reached into the briefcase and pulled out one of the folders, a manila one, slightly worn at the edges. "Mr. President," he began, his voice now entirely devoid of any trace of showmanship, replaced by a quiet earnestness. "You asked why I came beyond the badge, beyond the headlines. It's because I believe I have a unique perspective on this country, on its heart." He held up the folder. "These aren't fan letters, sir. Not the kind you'd think anyway. Oh, sure, I get millions of those. But these are different. These are from people who reach out, not for an autograph or a picture, but for something else entirely." Nixon, though outwardly stoic, felt a ripple of genuine intrigue. He watched Elvis trying to decipher his motive. Was this a subtle criticism of his administration? A veiled plea for a new government program? Or maybe because they feel like I'm a safe person to talk to, someone who won't judge? He gently opened the folder, revealing neatly bundled stacks of letters, some handwritten, some typed, some obviously old and faded. "They write to me about their problems, Mr. President. About their struggles, about loneliness, about their kids getting into trouble, about feeling like the world is moving too fast and they're being left behind, about being afraid for the future." Nixon leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on the contents of the briefcase. This was an unexpected turn. He had anticipated a celebrity, demanding attention, perhaps even criticizing his policies directly. Instead, he was being presented with a collection of laments from the anonymous public. "I know what it's like to be poor, Mr. President," Elvis said, his voice soft, almost reminiscent. "To come from nothing, to wonder where your next meal is coming from, to feel like you don't quite fit in, and even now, with all the fame and the money, I haven't forgotten the struggle." He pointed to a stack of letters. "These are from young people, sir. Kids who feel lost, who feel like no one understands them. They write to me about drugs, about their parents fighting, about feeling alone in a crowded world. They ask me for advice stack. These are from veterans, Mr. President, men who fought for this country, who came back changed. They feel forgotten. They write about the nightmares, the inability to connect. This dramaturge wasn't the kind of high-level policy discussion he was used to. This was raw, unfiltered human emotion, delivered by an unlikely messenger. He was a man who preferred facts and figures, strategic plans, not the messy realities of individual suffering. Yet there was something undeniably compelling about Elvis's sincerity. "And these," Elvis said gently, touching a final bundle, "these are from mothers. Mothers worried sick about their sons in Vietnam. Mothers struggling to feed their children. Mothers who just want to know that anyone out there cares about them and their families." The only sound was the soft rustle of paper as Elvis carefully handled the letters. He wasn't grandstanding, wasn't performing. He was simply presenting evidence, a tangible connection to the millions of people Nixon governed but rarely, if ever, directly heard from in such a personal, intimate way. "You see, Mr. President," Elvis continued, his eyes meeting Nixon's unwavering, "I believe the greatest service we can do is to truly listen, to understand the heart of the people. Because when people feel heard, when they feel understood, that's when divisions can start to heal." Nixon found himself speechless. He had prepared for a demand, a display, a negotiation. He had not prepared for this. This wasn't a celebrity asking for a favor. This was a man, a surprisingly perceptive one, trying to show him the unseen wounds of his nation, wounds that might not show up in economic reports or polling numbers. Elvis looked at the letters again, a deep sadness in his eyes, but also a glimmer of determination. "I brought these, sir, because I wanted you to see what I see, to hear what I hear. It's not always pretty, but it's real, and I truly believe that understanding these stories, truly understanding them, is the first step towards finding the answers this country so desperately needs." He gently closed the folder and placed it back into the briefcase. He didn't ask Nixon to read them, not yet. He had simply laid them bare, a tangible testament to the quiet, suffering, and yearning for connection that existed beneath the surface of American life, a world away from the corridors of power. King had presented his true offering, a different kind of gold. The silence that followed Elvis's explanation was profound, heavy with the weight of unspoken emotion. Nixon, usually so composed, found himself momentarily at a loss. This was not the Elvis Presley he had imagined. This was not the rock star, the icon, the symbol of youthful rebellion. This was a man with a quiet intensity, a surprising empathy, and a deep, undeniable connection to the struggles of ordinary Americans. "Mr. Presley," Nixon said, his voice unusually soft, a hint of genuine curiosity replacing his earlier skepticism, "are you saying you respond to these letters?" Elvis nodded slowly. "Sometimes it's trying to connect them with someone who can actually help, a local charity, a counselor, whatever I can." He paused, then reached into the briefcase, again pulling out a single thin letter much smaller than the others, written in what looked like a child's uncertain hand. "May I, Mr. President? May I share just a few?" Nixon hesitated, then nodded. President of the United States, listening to Elvis Presley, read fan mail. It was absurd, yet utterly compelling. Elvis unfolded the small letter gently. He asked me if I thought his dad would come home and if I could tell his mom to smile again just once. Elvis looked up, his blue eyes glistening slightly. "What do you say to a child like that, Mr. President? What do you tell him when you know the truth is so uncertain?" Nixon looked away, a flicker of something akin to pain crossing his face. He made the decisions that sent fathers to war, but he rarely, if ever, heard the direct, innocent plea of the children left behind. Elvis then picked up another letter, this one longer type. "She asked me if there was truly any hope left in the world." He laid the letter down. "She wanted to know if the dreams, she had as a little girl, the dreams of a good life, a happy family, if they were still possible, or if this new world, this fractured world, had already stolen them. Prided himself on his tough exterior, his ability to handle pressure, to make the hard choices. But these stories, raw and personal, were chipping away at his defenses. He was accustomed to dealing with statistics, with Jill tragedies. He wasn't used to facing the unvarnished, aching vulnerability of individual souls. Finally, Elvis picked up one more. This one from an older hand, slightly shaky. The one where people talk to each other, where neighbors help neighbors. He asked if that America was truly gone for good. Elvis put the letter back, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his gaze was direct, piercing. These, Mr. President, are the voices of America, not the ones you hear. These are the whispers, the cries, the quiet fears that echo in the homes of millions. They write to me because I'm Elvis. But they write about things that affect every single American, rich or poor, black or white, young or old. I believe, Elvis continued, his voice gaining strength, that if we, the people in power, the people with a platform, truly understand their pain and their yearning, then we can begin to find real solutions. Solutions that come from the heart, not just from the head. Nixon sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but the tightness around his eyes had softened slightly. He was a president grappling with an unpopular war, with deep social divides, with a growing sense of cynicism about government. He had prided himself on understanding this silent majority. But this was a silent majority he hadn't known existed, or at least hadn't acknowledged, in this deeply personal way. He looked at the worn briefcase, then back at Elvis. The king of rock and roll, the symbol of everything Nixon generally distrusted about modern culture, was sitting in his office, not asking for a favor, but offering a profound, unfiltered glimpse into the very soul of the nation he led. It was humbling. And for the first time in that formal, powerful room, a bridge began to form between two vastly different men. A long, quiet moment stretched between the two men. Clock on Nixon's desk ticked softly, the only sound in the hallowed room. Nixon, a man of profound self-control, found himself uncharacteristically moved. He was used to public appeals, political maneuvers, and the calculated art of governing. He was not used to such raw, unvarnished emotion. "So, Mr. Presley," Nixon finally said, his voice surprisingly muted, "you believe these letters offer a truer picture of the nation than the intelligence reports and economic forecasts I receive?" There was no challenge in his tone, only a genuine question. Elvis nodded slowly. "You might know the unemployment rate, but these letters tell you about the shame of a father who can't feed his kids." He paused, then continued, "I believe you, Mr. President, have one of the loneliest jobs in the world. Everyone wants something from you, everyone has an agenda, but who tells you about the little things, the everyday sadnesses, the quiet hopes that make up the fabric of his country?" Nixon looked out the window at the wintry White House lawn. He was indeed a lonely man, isolated by the immense power and responsibility he wielded. He rarely let anyone see behind the carefully constructed public facade. To hear Elvis Presley, of all people, speak of this loneliness struck a chord. "I suppose," Nixon said almost to himself, "that the burden of leadership is a heavy one, and yes, it can be isolating." He turned back to Elvis, a different light in his eyes. "You too, Mr. Presley. You are a king in your own right. You command millions. Do you not experience a similar isolation?" Elvis gave a small, rueful smile. "More than you know." "Sir, the applause, the adoration, it's a beautiful sound, but when the lights go down and you are alone in a hotel room." It was an unexpected confession, a shared vulnerability that bridged the vast divide between them. Both men, despite their radically different paths, were at the pinnacle of their respective worlds, burdened by immense expectations and a profound sense of isolation. They understood, in that moment, a commonality in their unique burdens. "So what do you suggest, Mr. Presley?" Nixon asked, his voice softer now, less formal. "What is it? You believe these letters, these voices, can tell me that I don't already know." "They tell you that people want to be seen, Mr. President," Elvis replied, his gaze earnest. "They tell you that even with all the problems, there's still so much good, so much resilience, so much love in this country. They tell you that people are yearning for connection, for understanding, for someone to truly listen. They tell you that hope, at even a tiny spark of it, can make all the difference in someone's life. You have the power, sir, to make grand gestures, to change laws, to send armies. But sometimes the greatest impact comes from the smallest understanding, from showing people that you see their struggles, that you hear their cries, that you care not just about the numbers, but about their human spirit." He was a politician, a strategist, often accused of being calculating and unemotional. But he was also a man who, deep down, loved his country and desired its betterment, even if his methods were often rigid and his demeanor aloof. Elvis was speaking to a part of him that rarely saw the light of day. "These letters," Nixon said, gesturing vaguely towards the briefcase, "they represent the very soul of America, do they not?" "They represent its heart," Mr. President, Elvis corrected gently. "And sometimes the heart is where the true answers lie, beyond the noise and the anger. If we can show it compassion and understanding, then maybe we can start to heal the divisions that are tearing us apart." For the first time, Nixon offered a small, genuine smile. It was fleeting, but it was there. He saw not just a celebrity, but a man driven by a profound sense of duty and empathy. In that moment, the president and the king, separated by a world of politics and performance, found common ground in their shared humanity and a mutual concern for the struggling soul of their nation. The awkward dance had become a fragile, unexpected understanding. The atmosphere in the Oval Office had undergone a remarkable transformation. The initial tension and guarded formality had given way to an unusual, almost comfortable dialogue. President Nixon, usually so controlled, found himself genuinely engaged, listening intently as Elvis spoke not of fame or music, but of the raw realities he encountered through the countless letters he received. "It's not just about drugs, Mr. President," Elvis explained, his voice reflective. "Though that's a big part of it, especially with the young folks. It's also about what makes people turn to drugs in the first place, that feeling of not belonging, of being judged, of not having a purpose. The societal factors," he mused, a term from his political lexicon. "Isolation, disillusionment." "Exactly," Sir Elvis agreed. "But it's more personal than that. It's a kid who feels invisible to his parents. It's a soldier coming home and finding his old life doesn't fit anymore. It's a family struggling to make ends meet, feeling like no one in Washington truly understands how hard they're working, just to put food on the table. They feel a lack of hope, Mr. President, and hope, that's a powerful thing. It's what keeps people going, and when it's gone, that's when trouble starts." Nixon steepled his fingers, his gaze distant, lost in thought. He had always focused on the grand narratives: Cold War, economic stability, national security. He understood the concept of public morale, but it was often viewed as a statistic, something to be managed. Elvis was showing him the human cost, the individual heartbeats beneath the national pulse. "So you believe a sense of connection, a feeling of being heard, could combat this disillusionment?" Nixon asked, testing the waters. "I believe it's a start, Sir Arthur," Elvis replied, his eyes earnest. "If people feel that their leaders, that the country itself, cares about them as individuals, not just as voters or taxpayers, then that's a powerful message. It tells them they matter, that their struggles are seen." He then touched on a sensitive topic, but one he clearly felt compelled to address. "The war, Mr. President, Vietnam. It's on everyone's mind. And in those letters you hear the raw fear from the mothers, the wives, the soldiers themselves. They understand the need for duty, for country, but they also question the cost. Vietnam was his cross to bear." the defining struggle of his presidency. He received daily briefings, analyses, casualty counts. But again, Elvis was speaking of the emotional toll, the quiet despair that festered in the homes across America far from the war rooms. "They're asking for answers, Mr. President," Elvis continued bravely. "Not just about strategy, but about meaning. They want to know their sacrifice, their pain, isn't in vain. They want to believe in something bigger than themselves, but they're losing that belief." Nixon looked out the window again, his eyes clouded. But to hear it articulated with such raw personal testimony from a man who arguably represented the very generation that was most alienated was a stark reminder of the emotional weight of his decisions. "What about the counterculture, Mr. Presley?" Nixon finally asked, turning back, his voice more probing now. "The long hair, the protests, the drug use, do these letters address that?" Elvis nodded. "They do, sir. Many of those young people feel alienated. They feel that the system doesn't represent them. They're searching for something. Sometimes they find it in dangerous places, for truth, and when they don't find it in the usual places, they look elsewhere." Nixon pressed a flicker of his usual stern self, returning. "Absolutely, sir," Elvis said firmly. "I wore the uniform. I believe in discipline, in doing what's right, but I also believe that true order comes from within, from people feeling a sense of purpose and belonging, and sometimes Mr. President pressed him and tore." He paused, then added, "Many of the kids who write to me, they're not bad kids. They're just lost. They need guidance, not just judgment. They need someone to show them a better path, to show them that there's a place for them, even if they don't fit the mold." The discussion continued for what felt like hours, though in reality it was likely less than an hour. They touched on faith, on family, on the responsibility of those in power to uplift the spirit of the nation. Nixon, the pragmatic politician, found himself listening to the insights of a rock and roll icon, insights gleaned from the deepest, most personal corners of the American soul. As their conversation began to wind down, Nixon looked at the briefcase, then back at Elvis. "Mr. Presley," he said, a new respect in his tone, "you've given me much to consider. I confess this was not the meeting I anticipated." Elvis offered a small, genuine smile. "I hoped it wouldn't be, Mr. President. I hoped it would be something different, and indeed it had been. Far more different and far more meaningful than either man could have ever predicted." Conversation, initially so awkward and formal, had settled into an unexpected rhythm, a flow of ideas and perspectives between two men from vastly different worlds. As the time for the meeting drew to a close, a subtle shift had occurred in the Oval Office. The air no longer hummed with tension, but with a quiet resonance of shared understanding. Nixon stood a signal that the meeting was drawing to its close. Elvis rose too, reaching for his worn briefcase. "Mr. President," he said, his voice respectful, "thank you for your time, for listening. It means a lot." Nixon walked around his desk, something he rarely did for visitors, especially not for an initial meeting. He extended his hand, and this time there was genuine warmth in his grip. "Mr. Presley," he said, his gaze direct, "I must say you are a far more complex individual than your public persona suggests." Elvis offered a wry smile. "We all are, sir, aren't we? Beyond the headlines, beyond the stages, beyond the big desks, we're all just people trying to do our best." Nixon held his gaze for a moment longer, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "Indeed, and your unique perspective drawn from these letters, it is truly illuminating. It puts a human face on the challenges we face, a very personal one." He then surprisingly gestured back to the briefcase. Would you consider leaving a few of those letters with me? Perhaps the ones you found most poignant. I would like to read them." Elvis's eyes widened slightly in surprise, then softened with relief. This was a victory far greater than any badge or publicity stunt. This was genuine curiosity, a willingness to see beyond the political reports. "Of course, Mr. President," he said, already unlatching the briefcase again. He carefully selected a handful of letters: the boy from Ohio, the lost young woman, the lonely veteran, and a few others that spoke of quiet despair and desperate hope. He handed them to Nixon, who took them with a surprising gentleness. He held them almost reverently, as if they were fragile artifacts of immense value, and in a way they were. "Thank you, Mr. Presley," Nixon said, a hint of something resembling humility in his voice. I will read these carefully." Elvis felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He had come here with a heavy heart, wanting to convey a message he felt was vital, but uncertain how it would be received. He had expected dismissal, perhaps even ridicule. Instead, he had found a surprising opening, a moment of shared humanity. "And about that badge, Mr. Presley," Nixon continued, a slight return to his more formal tone, though it was now softened by the preceding conversation. "I believe we can arrange that a badge for a federal agent at large is a symbol of your dedication to combating drug abuse and your commitment to this nation's youth." Elvis grinned, a flash of the king's famous charisma returning. "Thank you, Mr. President. That means a lot, truly." Nixon gave a brisk nod. "Now, I believe there are some photographers waiting. A few pictures, if you don't mind." "Happy to, sir," Elvis replied, ready to step back into his public role. The meeting was over, but the quiet understanding, the shared moment of vulnerability would remain. As they walked towards the waiting photographers, the iconic image of Elvis Presley, in his flamboyant purple velvet suit, shaking hands with President Richard Nixon in the solemn Oval Office, was captured. The world would see a strange, unlikely pairing. They wouldn't know about the worn briefcase, about the stacks of anonymous letters, or the profound conversation that had just unfolded. They wouldn't know that Elvis had shown Nixon not a gun or a karate chop, but the raw, aching heart of America, and Nixon, despite his gruff exterior, had listened. He had opened a small, unseen door in his soul. As Elvis was escorted out of the White House, the buzz and curiosity of the staff were still palpable. He waved, gave a few nods, his usual charm back in full force, but beneath the surface he carried a quiet satisfaction. He had done what he set out to do. He had tried to connect the most powerful man in the world with the most vulnerable voices of the nation. He had planted a seed, and he hoped with all his heart that it might one day bloom. Leaving the White House, Elvis felt a strange mix of relief and renewed purpose. The formal corridors, the hushed efficiency. It was a world away from Graceland, from the screaming fans and the bright lights of the stage. Yet, in that stiff, proper setting, he had found a connection, however fleeting, with the most powerful man in the nation. He settled into the limousine, the sunglasses back in place, masking his thoughts. Sonny West, his bodyguard, looked at him expectantly. "So, boss, how'd it go? Did you get the badge?" Elvis reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound wallet. He opened it to reveal a gleaming gold badge. "Federal agent at large." He grinned. "Yup, Sonny got the badge, but that wasn't the story. That was just the public face. The real story was the quiet exchange, the shared moment of humanity." He looked out the window at the passing DC monuments, feeling a profound sense of hope, fragile though it might be. He had tried to bridge a gap, to show the president a side of America he might not often see from the Oval Office. Back at the White House, President Nixon returned to his desk. The room, so recently filled with the unexpected presence of Elvis Presley, now felt unusually quiet. He looked at the stack of letters Elvis had left for him. They lay there, unassuming, yet suddenly carrying an immense weight. Picked up the first one, the letter from the boy in Ohio. Nixon, a man who had negotiated with world leaders and made life and death decisions, found himself reading the simple penciled words of a scared child. He pictured the boy, small and worried, missing his father. He felt a pang, a small, unexpected ache in his chest. Then he read the letter from the young woman lost and heartbroken by drug abuse. He had always approached the drug problem from a policy standpoint. Enforcement, legislation, international cooperation. But this letter spoke of addiction not as a crime, but as a symptom of deep personal despair. It spoke of a young life on the brink, yearning for hope. He continued through the small stack of letters. The weary veteran, missing an America that perhaps never truly existed, but a longing that was undeniably real. The struggling mother trying to keep her family afloat in a turbulent world. Each letter was a window into a life, a raw, unvarnished glimpse of the challenges faced by the American people. Nixon sat for a long time, the letters spread before him. He was not a man prone to overt emotional displays, but the quiet impact of these personal stories was undeniable. They spoke of a different kind of war, a war within the hearts and homes of the nation, a war he felt he was only now truly beginning to understand. He thought of Elvis, the rock star who had seemed so out of place in his formal office. But Elvis, with his direct connection to the common man, had bypassed all the usual channels, all the reports and briefings, and delivered a message straight from the source he had shown, Nixon, the unfiltered pulse of the nation. "Get me, Haldeman," Nixon finally said into his intercom, his voice a little different, a little subdued. When Haldeman arrived, he found the president looking thoughtfully at the letters. "Yes, Mr. President," Nixon gestured to the stack. "These, Bob, for Mr. Presley." He brought them to illustrate a point. He picked up the letter from the struggling mother. "We talk about poverty, about economic policy, but these are the individual faces of that struggle." "Haldeman, Mr. President." "More than interesting, Bob," Nixon replied, his gaze distant. "They are important. They remind us who we are ultimately serving. Not just statistics, not just policies, but people, real people with real struggles." He didn't make a grand pronouncement. He didn't suddenly declare a radical shift in policy. That wasn't Nixon's way. But something had stirred within him. A seed of empathy had been planted, a new understanding of the emotional landscape of the country he led. Later that week, in a cabinet meeting about urban programs, Nixon surprised his advisors by bringing up the need for more community-level support, emphasizing the importance of local outreach and direct interaction. But the subtle shift in his focus was there, a quiet echo of the unique meeting that had taken place in his private office. Elvis, back at Graceland, returned to his music, to his life as the king, but he also continued his quiet mission, responding to letters, reaching out to those in need, offering comfort and hope where he could. He knew one meeting wouldn't change the world overnight, but if he could touch one person, if he could ignite a spark of understanding in even one powerful leader, then it was worth it. And in the heart of President Nixon, an unlikely seed had indeed been sown. The meeting between Elvis Presley and President Richard Nixon became a legendary anecdote, a bizarre footnote in the annals of American history. The iconic photo of the king in his purple suit, shaking hands with the stoic president, circulated globally, fueling countless jokes and theories. What did they talk about? Most assumed it was about the badge, or perhaps some celebrity endorsement. The true depth of their conversation, the personal exchange, remained a secret guarded by the walls of the Oval Office and the inherent privacy of two men who carried the weight of nations and millions of eyes. For Elvis, the experience solidified his belief in his own unique platform, continued to be Elvis the performer, the dazzling king of rock and roll. But the meeting with Nixon had quietly reinforced his sense of responsibility, his understanding that his fame could be used for something more profound than just entertainment. He amplified his quiet acts of charity, responding to more letters, making discreet donations, and encouraging his entourage to do the same. He began to explore his spiritual side even more deeply, searching for answers, not just for himself, but for the lost souls he encountered through those countless letters. He always carried a profound compassion for the struggles of the common person, a trait that rooted him to his humble beginnings, despite his superstar status. For President Nixon, the impact was more subtle, almost imperceptible to the outside world. He never publicly spoke of the letters Elvis had shown him, nor did he ever directly credit the king with any change in his perspective. That was not his style. Yet those letters remained, tucked away perhaps in a personal file, or simply imprinted on his memory. They were a constant, quiet counterpoint to the political briefings, the economic reports, and the strategic analyses that filled his days. In the months and years that followed, there were small, almost unnoticeable shifts in Nixon's approach. He spoke, occasionally, in private meetings about the importance of understanding the heartland of America, about the quiet anxieties of families. He initiated certain programs aimed at community outreach, at connecting government agencies more directly with individual citizens beyond the traditional bureaucratic channels. He never linked these initiatives to Elvis, but a quiet observer might have seen a faint echo of the human stories that Elvis had laid bare in the Oval Office. The world would remember Nixon for Watergate, for his complex and often controversial presidency. It would remember Elvis for his music, his charisma, his tragic end. They were two men, symbols of wildly different eras and ideals, who met at a pivotal moment in American history. One, a political titan grappling with the immense pressures of leadership. The other, a cultural phenomenon seeking to use his influence for genuine good. Their meeting, initially prompted by a simple request for a badge, evolved into something far more significant. Came a testament to the unexpected power of human connection, the ability of two disparate individuals to find common ground in their shared concern for the welfare of others. Elvis Presley, the king, hadn't shown President Nixon a gun, or a dance move, or even a grand plan. He had shown him the unvarnished, aching heart of America, one letter at a time. And in that quiet, powerful revelation, a seed of understanding was planted. A seed of hope that even the most formidable walls of power could be touched by the simple, profound voices of humanity. The story of that December day was not just about two famous men, but about the enduring belief that empathy, even in the unlikeliest of encounters, could truly make a difference.